Hello, welcome to this month's webinar from WISIONS, Great Expectations, Productive Uses of Energy Off the Grid. Thanks for joining us here today. We're really pleased to bring you a terrific panel of speakers today. We'll have Dr. Julia Terrapon-Pfaff from WISIONS and the Wuppertal Institute, David Lecoq from the Alliance for Rural Electrification, and Pooja Sharma from Practical Action, Nepal. As always, we're going to welcome your questions throughout the course of the webinar. Please let us know who your question is directed to when you send it through, and that's going to better help us to answer those questions and ensure that you get the answers that you're here for today. And we also want to remind you that at the very end, there will be a survey. We'd love to have your feedback on this webinar, whether it's from the technical aspects, but also content-wise, and what you would like to see in the future. So we'd encourage you to please stick around until the end. To get us kicked off here, first of all, I'm going to do a very quick couple of polls. The first one is about which global region you're based in today. So let me go ahead and launch that one. And this is to promote a bit of interactivity. We've got several questions we're going to ask you throughout the webinar today, and that's to know who it is that we're speaking with, and also to have your views on why you're interested in this topic and what are the challenges and the successes that you've experienced. So I think most people have voted on this poll. I'm going to go ahead and close that out and go to our next poll. But first, I'm going to show you the results. So let me just close that out. And show that to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me bring that back to my screen. That's my mistake. Yeah, great. Sorry, guys. All right. So I'm going to share that poll with you so that you can see that. All right. So which global region are you in today? We see quite a few people in the Americas, Europe, Africa and the Middle East, South Asia, and Asia as well. So thanks everybody for joining. I know it's a little late, probably in Asia, so thanks for staying up a little later with us. And good morning to everybody in the Americas, and good afternoon to everybody in our time zone here in Europe. Next up, we will do our second poll. And let me just go ahead and bring that up for you. And we'd like to know a little bit about what you do in your role or what type of organization you might be working for. So I have put that up for you. We'd like to know, are you working for an NGO or nonprofit, maybe a company, government, academia, or other? So please let us know what's your role in this, and that way it helps our speakers to understand who they're speaking to today and to know a little bit about you guys. So thanks everybody for voting. I'm going to go ahead and close that out and share the poll with you. And we're really pleased to have you guys all here with us today. Thanks for getting started with us right on time today. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to close that and share it with you. Go ahead and share that. Okay, great. So we see about a third of you are working for NGOs or nonprofits. Nearly half of you working for private sector companies, 8% from government, 8% from academia, and 8% other. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. And this is going to be quite an interesting topic. What I'd like to do now is move directly into our first presentation, losing no time. We're going to go directly over to Julia Terrapon-Pfaff from WISIONS and the Wuppertal Institute, who's going to set the scene for us today and really give us an understanding of what it is we're talking about when we talk about the productive uses of energy and whether implementing productive uses of energy necessarily results in development outcomes. So that's what we're going to hear from today. And let me go ahead and request that she shares her slides with us. Hi, Julia. Are you there on the line?
Yes. Hello, Molly.
Hi, Julia. So I turn it over to you. Thanks for being with us, and we're very interested to hear about the research that you've been conducting on this particular issue.
Yes, thank you very much, Molly, for the introduction, and also a warm welcome on behalf of the WISIONS team. And I will start my presentation with great expectations in regard to sustainable energy access, one of which is productive use of energy. And then I will shortly continue with the pathways along which productive use is expected to develop after sustainable energy access is provided. And The research I'm presenting is based on the Visions initiative. The Visions initiative is running since 2004, so close to 15 years now, and over the time we have supported 122 projects and knowledge exchanges. As you can see, in different regions in over 40 countries, we have addressed different, and the projects we supported have addressed different energy needs, implemented very different technologies. So we have a broad range of different projects, and we did an impact evaluation for 30 of these projects, and the results I'm presenting today are based on the findings from this impact evaluation. So most energy projects don't only want to provide access to energy, but energy is more of a means to development. And I think this quote from SMAP really nicely summarizes these expectations in regard to energy, saying that socioeconomic development is the primary objective of expanding energy access, and that energy access is critical for challenges such as poverty, gender inequality, poor health, education services, and also the absence of food security, and therefore is an important ingredient towards a sustainable development. So as you see, there are a lot of expectations in regard to access to energy, and you have the small-scale energy project on the one side, and then you expect a positive impact, and which in the end should contribute to the sustainable development. However, impact pathways unfortunately never look like this straight, but rather they often look like this, more backward forward. You have to do some loops to finally arrive at positive impacts, and some projects also don't arrive at these impacts. So when you do an impact evaluation and you ask yourself what happened, so we implemented the technology and energy access was provided, and in the end we had some positive impact or we didn't have, then you don't really know what happens in between. So this is kind of a black box. Just to give an example, for example, if you implement a technology in 3 communities, one is doing very well, one is doing okay, and one community doesn't work. If you just ask what happened, you don't know in the future how to address the problems if there would be problems. So you have to ask yourself what, why, and how did this happen? And this is what we tried to do in our impact evaluation, or here illustrated in a cartoon. We have the energy projects on the one side and the sustainable development goals on the other side. But in between, what happens? A miracle occurs. Well, then one of the guys says, I think I should be more explicit here in step 2. So this is what we tried to do within our impact evaluation. I will very shortly go over this slide. So we did a theory-based evaluation, meaning that we didn't compare one community that got technology with another who didn't, but instead we choose a theory-based approach where you start from the project and then think, what do I expect to happen, and then check with the reality, did it really happen or didn't it happen? And then we also did a more systematic assessment, not only one project, but we analyzed 30 projects. So it's a more systematic to come to more general conclusions. So just one slide on our evaluation sample. So I said we had 30 projects, nearly 80% of them initiated productive activities. The productive activities were, for example, small-scale businesses like energy shops where mobile phones could be charged, food preparation like a solar bakery, or farming services, which could be like irrigation or post-harvest processing. So with a theory-based approach, you start with a theory. So this is a more general overview about small-scale energy projects and what is all expected of them. And then we took a closer look into why and how, in this case, for the productive use of energy, and developed a theory of change for small-scale energy project and productive use of energy. And you start with looking at existing evidence. So we did a very detailed analysis of all existing reports that we could get on literature and so on. And then we compared this with our results. So in the beginning, you have the activities, the inputs, which is capacity building, of course, the technical side, then facilitating access to finance and information and awareness raising activities. And then you expect these to lead to capacity changes. On the one hand, sufficient quality and quantity of energy is provided, also to allow for productive use, and financing options are available for productive use, and you have the skill set in the community or in the entrepreneur to realize these productive use. The next step is that are expected behavior changes, so the establishment of productive use. Here you can distinguish between improvement of productive activities, an increase of productive activities, or new productive activities, and then also if energy is provided and maybe time and workload is reduced, time is saved and workload is reduced, and this will lead also to new productive activities because more time is available for these type of activities. And then if you have productive activities, you're of course expected, for example, that you have higher production, higher sales, or better quality and higher prices, resulting in increased income and new employment, or also if local production is then fostered, reduction of imports or imports into the community, into rural communities, for example, and increased availability and strengthening of the local economy. And then in the end, of course, this should have positive impact on the livelihoods. However, if you see all the small little arrows that connect all the boxes, behind all these arrows is are assumptions, and to each assumption there are several risks. So a lot can go wrong at every step, and need to be analyzed where problems occur, where projects are successful. So this is how we analyzed our data along this theory of change. And just to give you a quick summary of our findings, along this impact chains from activities to capacity changes to behavior changes, outcomes, and potential long-term impacts. So our evaluation showed that energy was regularly sufficiently provided in enough quantity, enough quality in the majority of projects. Nearly all projects had capacity building activities. What was really important that the capacity building activity not only addressed the energy technology, but the productive activity as well. Financing options need to be available, but even more important was that they were accessible for local entrepreneurs, because often this is still difficult. Also, they are available. And then full out market information and market assessment are usually necessary. That should also include the subsequent value chain. So you don't just produce something and then you don't have a market for it. Then on the step from capacity to behavior changes in our project, a lot of new productive activities were established, and these productive activities were usually always an integrated part of the energy project. They didn't develop by themselves. And employment can be created, but it's also important to look at the type of work that is created. And another factor is also to look if existing jobs might be replaced, because often the very poor offer services like, for example, selling candles, and then if the new energy technology comes in, they are the ones that often lose their jobs, and the other people can use the opportunity. So this needs to be considered. And a very big risk in our sample was that persons that have been trained leave for better job opportunities. This is, of course, always a high risk. So it's necessary to train more than 1 or 2, 3 people to ensure a long-term success of productive activities. And in our sample, it was shown that productive activities do not necessarily increase incomes. We only could discover small increases in income. So there is already, at least in our research, we couldn't find the evidence that there's a really high increase in income. So in the end, of course, this is only for short term. These projects running for a few years. Usually when we do the evaluation, we can't talk about long-term impacts, but even these small increases in incomes, the small changes were already very well perceived as substantial by the beneficiaries. So, so far from me, this was just a summary of our research. So, do I hand back over to you now, Molly, or?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Julia. I mean, I think that starts us off with a very strong basis of evidence and what your research has been showing, actually. So without ado, I'll move directly over to David Lecoq, who is our second presenter from the Alliance for Rural Electrification. Hi, David.
Hi, Molly. Thank you very much. Let me click on the right button here. Yes, can you see my screen properly?
Yes. Yeah, perfect.
All
Okay.
right, wonderful.
Great. I hand it over to you.
Thank you. And also, Julia, I think that was a really nice presentation, also with the theory of change. Quite a good overview that I'm happy to relay, so to say. Here I'm trying to. Oh, the next slide seems to not want to. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. So my name is David Lecoq. I'm the Policy and Business Manager at the Alliance for Rural Electrification. Perhaps 2 words about what ARE is, for those of you who don't know. We are basically the oldest and biggest business association for the private sector, especially, who is involved in decentralized renewables for electrification in developing countries. So the private sector or the energy access delivery service, if you will. And we have about 150 of those members right now that you can all find on our off-grid matchmaking platform. That's the link all the way below on the slide, where the direct contact details of all the relevant members are mentioned. So if you would like to reach out to them to, if you need a supplier, financier, whatever, you can do so through me, but also directly to them, because at the end of the day, we are a business association. And so business is what we do, as well as advocacy and communications. So about the topic of today, productive use of renewable energy. Well, actually, this is something we wrote a little paper about already 3 years ago, in which we defined it, and there seems to be no universal definition on what it is, but basically activities that can be agriculture, commercial, industrial, whatever, that are powered by renewables that generate income, meaning not necessarily not hospitals, not schools, not this kind of social services, but really activities, the point of which is to generate income, with a little table there outlining that, well, usually a lot of the times it's for agriculture, right, for solar pumps, irrigation, powering the grinding and the milling and the husking machines, for also entertainment and refrigeration, as we have seen in Julia's slides. This certainly takes up the agriculture part, or the processing of agricultural products certainly takes up a large part of the productive use possibilities. So what I would like to show you today is 2 basically little case studies, out of which we have extrapolated together with in consultation with a few members, what now are really a bit the, let's say, lessons learned, what we can do on the project and on the regulatory level to enhance this kind of productive use project. So the first of these case studies takes place in India. This is actually a case study that was quite well assisted by ARE, because through the ARE's cooperation with OFIT, this was a very determining factor in the financing of this project after our call for proposals internally. And so essentially here the idea was to make a scalable, replicable clean electrification project in Jharkhand, the budget of which is almost $500,000. Basically what has happened is that they've installed with Melinda Foundation 3 new hybrid mini grids in the 3 villages, which resulted in 358 households, as you can see, that have a 24/7 electricity provision. So this is of course very important. There's backup been installed. So on the one hand you have this consumptive use, and on the other hand, you have the, let's say, productive users, which are the commercial outlets. So those, in this case, the poultry units, as well as activities such as the irrigation, the hulling, the cold storage. Let's say that we're all connected, and that's over 100 of the users there. that were productive users. So oftentimes you see a bit of a mix of consumptive and productive use based on the same installation, because at the end of the day, it's the infrastructure can serve the different purposes. This has created 65 actually jobs directly and indirectly inside these local communities, and with a measured income increase over I think it was about 2 years of a bit over 10% in these particular villages. All of this thanks to a system of only 100 kilowatt peak in total, so divided over the 3 villages. So this you see is already well, a pretty classical electrification project that can serve both domestic demand, as a household demand, as well as business demand. That was co-financed through a grant for when it comes to the infrastructure, and that now well has had a pretty significant impact. So that's a success story. Of course, there are also failures, but in this case, it's a success. Our second case, moving on to Africa, which is certainly a very core region to us, is from our board member Ensol out of Tanzania, where in their case they have installed solar water pumping systems in the south part of Tanzania with a cost of about 340k USD. So what has happened here is that the local medical foundation has had a tender process that they have instituted with financing from the EU. And essentially now they have installed a solar water pumping system, and that has created about 50,000 beneficiaries because it generates or it supplies rather up to 50,000 liters also of tap water per day in each of these villages, where before there was water scarcity, where you had to walk a long time to get to the well. Here 11 villages benefited and 50 jobs were created. And as I mentioned before, the primary application really is both the irrigation of the fields and then the community drinking water. So it's here a commercial activity as well as, let's say, more social activity with only 6.12 kilowatt installed. What can we learn from this kind of case study? This is, of course, just 2 small snapshots of 2 projects, but still we have learned also from earlier research on these projects and after some discussions with members that really you need to distinguish between the project level, of course, and the regulatory level, and not on the project level. And it's not by chance that this is the first point, is that you need to, as a developer of these kind of projects, really, I mean, it's cliche, but engage with these local communities, really understand what is wanted. Is it wanted at all? To what degree? What are you going to do with it? What is the current situation? And so on. Also for the local acceptance, but also on a technical level, this is very important to understand really what is going to be the end user demand, so you can do your project sizing and your project design properly. Typically that you arrive, let's say, as the technology provider with infrastructure that is adapted to the needs of the local community, and that ideally, because typically you see that demand grows within the next 6 to 12 months after the infrastructure has been installed. Ideally, of course, you have units that are modular, so that you can essentially add capacity as time moves forward and as demand goes higher. How do you now make it into a success? And a really key part, and this is not only for productive use, also for any kind of power project really, is that, well, you need sufficient demand. Quite simply, if people use more electricity, then you are going to have a higher revenue stream, which is bolstering your business case. And not only bolstering your business case as the person developing the project, because it means it will be more sustainable and all these things if that happens, but also now that if then indeed business activities are powered now thanks to this new installation, the capacity to make money and the willingness to also pay the electricity bill, if you will, now that to keep the lights on, is both, well, higher because on the one hand, the income is being generated, you're used to it, and you need to have it to continue and expand your operations. So it's really a win-win situation, both for the developer and for the end user. A third point on this regard is that, of course, as we all know, many of these systems nowadays, at least the quality ones, have integrated remote monitoring systems and so on. Also, often payment platforms and so on are integrated, all of which generates a lot of data. And so on the project level, so what is being consumed, what's being produced, but also are the bills being paid. And over time, on the basis of that data, you get really granular sort of core project data. You can define and refine rather your business model, and especially you can go to an investor and say, look, this is not something that I think is going to happen in the next projects I want to build, but this is what has happened in the projects that I've already built. This is real life data. And this is also a very key part later on to attract, again, more financing. Of course, no two projects are the same, but if you can show that through your activities, you have a pretty good track record that is demonstrable through this real-time data measurement and payment measurement, then you can definitely more easily convince any investor to, well, help you or invest in your next project. At the end, of course, when you install the project, you need to continually assess these kind of projects and also ensure the maintenance, of course, at least once a year to really learn, okay, what has worked, what has not worked, and then how to do it better next time. That's on the project level, some highlights. When it comes to the policy level, and perhaps a bit preempting on the Q&A, but really, for productive use, the case is a lot like it is for decentralized renewables in general. It's not that you need, of course, you have targets and these kind of things, but really the core part here is to have a proper, adequate, and incentivizing policy and regulatory framework for decentralized renewables. It's not only about productive use, also about the consumptive use, and so the provision of social services, increasing the living standards. So all of this is infrastructure which needs proper regulation. That's the one piece. The other piece is that, well, as we know, the public sector is crucial in helping this sector well grow. And nowadays there is the trend to, instead of having 100% grants for projects and that there's not necessarily a big follow-up later on, that the money that is available is being leveraged, like in the tool like the EU's Electrify, to attract more private finance, right? So what is being done is you have this sort of partial risk guarantees, you can buy down interest rates. I mean, there's a lot of sort of financial engineering ongoing, but that really boosts dramatically the capacity of money that can be raised for this kind of projects, including the productive use projects. To get back to what Julia was saying before, and I fully subscribe to that, energy is, of course, crucial for proper local economic development. It is not it's not the only thing that is required. People often say, and Ban Ki-moon made that statement a while ago, like energy is a golden thread. That is absolutely correct, but it's not just about power. You need a lot more things in terms of infrastructure, in terms of skills training, as was nicely shown on Julia's slide, that really need to be done to enable this local development. Part of that is the local skills training with the technical business management education, both on the system part and on how do you capitalize on the opportunity of now having power in the village. How do you capitalize on it? What can you concretely do in your agriculture, in your processing, in your go-to-market to well, make the most out of it? I think that's I will leave it at that for the moment, and then we can, of course, go into more depth in the Q&A that I'm very happy to answer any and all questions that I can. Perhaps I take just of this opportunity to invite anyone here on the webinar in the audience who may be interested to be on the one hand an exhibitor and especially a speaker at some of our upcoming events in Asia and Sao Paulo, that please get in touch with me or directly with the person mentioned there from Ara in the slides, so that that we can see if we can integrate you in the program. So thank you very much, everyone, and Molly for this opportunity, and I'm very happy to participate in the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. Wonderful. So, great. So I think this raises a lot of very interesting questions. I just want to remind the audience to please send in their own questions to all of the panelists, and we will really be happy to answer some of those questions also in the Q&A. So when you send those through, please let us know who your question is for. And we'll make sure that it gets directed to them, whether we're able to take it up live or whether it's something to discuss perhaps afterwards over email. Next up, I'd like to welcome Pooja Sharma from Practical Action Nepal. Hi, Pooja, are you there?
Hi, Molly.
Hi, great. So I think from your side, I mean, we've been hearing from both Julia and David, kind of from the research side, and then from the private sector side of things. And now we're going to hear a little bit more about, I think, some potentially some examples and also some methods that could be used in multiple places, not just in Nepal. So Pooja, with that, I welcome you here to the webinar, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Molly. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending from different parts of the globe. Looks like we have a very diverse group in terms of geography and type of organizations, which are shown by the poll. And thank you, Visions, for this opportunity. As Molly mentioned, I'm Pooja Sharma, working for Practical Action. We are a development charity registered in the UK. We are active in 4 regions of the development work, and we are working in the space of energy, agriculture, wash, and disaster risk reduction. In the case of Nepal, I'll be talking about a few of our examples in the field, which was supported by regions. The project name is called SMRE, but before that, I'll be showing you some slides that shows our history in the work of energy space. This slide shows our journey so far in relation to productive uses. As you can see, we started our like microhydro projects where spontaneous demand of enterprises came after the installation of microhydro projects. That was a long time back, maybe like more than 25-30 years back. We then did specific interventions such as providing incentives for entrepreneurs, and then now market development approach, which we adopted in our SMRE project. And recently, we have also been doing a nexus kind of projects between, like nexus between energy and agriculture, trying to explore more on nexus between energy and wash as well. So, what is our motivation? Why we want to do this productive use of energy services? And we are not different from other organizations, not different from what Julia and David has mentioned. We want to demonstrate and inspire the market actors that market development approach can definitely drive productive use activities, which can be sustainable and then also upscaled widely. We all know that these are the limitations, like for example, low consumption of electricity, low electricity demand, that results in low reserve fund, poor service delivery, irregular in payment, and then again, unsustainable enterprises. Like when energy projects started, or when people started talking about productive use, they started talking about unsustainability of the energy systems itself, but then not thinking really about sustainability of enterprises. So these go on and on, and we know like what are the challenges. We also know that more investments and finance need to secure for productive use, whether it is from public, including development partners, or private sector, and it's not happening the way it should have been. So we know the reason. It's very clear, and we all need to address these challenges. So what is Practical Action actually doing that contributes to address these challenges? Actually, we are not limited to very narrow definition of productive uses, which looks at the number of enterprises, their installed capacity, and the available surplus power that could feed in those enterprises. Rather, we look at a very wider aspect that drives productive use and livelihood opportunities within our market development approach. We've done several projects in different parts of the world. Our engagement on productive use in other countries have also resulted positive impacts. Like we've just recently carried out an impact evaluation in Peru, like where we had supported in identifying enterprises and supported with business development trainings. There we had found out that 48%, electricity consumption was increased by 48% and family monthly income increased up to 30%. Similarly, we are also providing technical assistance to leading private sector mini grid developers like Power Hive in African countries like Kenya. So we do have other experiences in other countries which might be interesting for some people. Colleagues here, which we can share in email exchanges later. But now moving on to Nepal case, we did, I think it was 3 years back when we did SMRE project, which is sustainable micro-hydro through energizing rural enterprises and livelihood project, which was supported by Visions. We worked in 5 micro-hydro projects, 3 in Nepal and 2 in Odisha, wherein we were able to facilitate the establishment of 21 new enterprises. And then we could see that the income status of the micro-hydros on an average increased up to 18%. We also found out that there was an increase in operational time of the businesses and also the micro-hydro systems itself. New value chain were explored. Majority of businesses were reported profit. We could also, convince communities that they can have differentiated rates, energy tariff rates between the household consumption and productive use consumption. So energy tariff collection was strengthened, and a kind of business culture was strengthened in the communities. And this resulted in a very good community bondage, wherein like people were coming in one place and then talking about energy users, productive users, and then again they were their bondage was strengthened in such a way that they could go together for other kind of economic development activities like school opening or such kind of activities. So these are the kind of experiences we have from SMRE project. As I said, like our methodology looked at very wider aspects of productive use. So what we do or what we have been doing is, we start with the market assessment and value chain analysis that helps us to identify, or that helps us and market actors to identify high potential productive use activities actually that can really increase income or productivity in different sectors, like it could be agriculture, manufacturing, or services as well. Our methodology includes this to avoid, regular productive use kind of activities where often enterprises like energy providers take the easy option, which may lead to increased consumption but not necessarily increased income. This was also highlighted by, Julia, like Julia was mentioning, not necessarily it increased the income. So that might be the reasons, like sometimes people take very easy options. And our market assessment analysis helps us to have more economic impact because it opens avenues for new external markets also. The next is about promotional activities, which includes awareness raising and information dissemination. The whole idea is to facilitate demand-driven, customer-focused initiatives. So when we do this, communities are informed about the market assessment results, value chain. We discuss about the potentials in their area, so that they can have, they can make informed decisions. Otherwise, in some of the cases, I think David was mentioning, we also have had bad experience of load growth, which was very difficult to handle in some of the solar mini grid projects that came in after 1 or 2 years of project implementation. Sometimes, people also have faced sometimes difficulties in addressing those load growth. So we do that because, and we think it's very important, awareness raising and information dissemination. But then we also provide business development support for entrepreneurs. That includes, supporting entrepreneurs to develop their go-to-market strategies, business plans of the enterprises. This actually depends upon the market maturity. If there exists that kind of service providers, then we facilitate the linkages. Otherwise, we try to develop the capacity of the market actors there, so that afterwards they can provide this facility. We also facilitate linkage between entrepreneurs and the equipment suppliers, after-sales service providers, financial intermediaries. We look at different options like other programs, if other programs are already providing, if any other economic development program are already providing any revolving funds support, or are like microfinance institutions are already providing incentives for loans. So we facilitate those linkages. We do not only look at one player or one subsector, so we look and analyze the entire system. This means that we provide support services to provide, business plans of the microhydro itself. Like we often talk about the business plans of the enterprises, but then we forget about the business plan of the microhydro or the energy systems, like and the changes that enterprises can bring in. So we help communities to design the tariffs, and the business plan also include, installation of energy meters if they would like to have these provision of operation and maintenance fund. Maybe the microhydro can run in a very commercial manner, so that they can themselves provide incentives for establishing enterprises to their customers. So these kind of discussions are done in a very participatory way with the communities and all the other market actors. And we also collaborate with the private sector who are available there. We try to engage them to understand the needs of the communities. These are some of the examples of our work there. We do all this based on our PMSD approach, that is a participatory market system development approach that actually enhances collaboration between market actors and helps to identify barriers together and then act together for the solutions. Again, this is the example of one of the participatory workshop. So if you ask me, like, what are the success factors, I would, highlight, put it in box in a way that the first one that comes to my mind is, the approach of productive use should be demand focused rather than offer focused, and a very comprehensive analysis of demand and its potential needs to be done. It is one of the very critical success factors. To make productive use intervention sustainable, it should be in the best interest of the communities, so that it is sustainable and then it can be replicable also. Productive use should also build on existing skills and market. We had, discussed about what about the person who was selling, Julia was mentioning, like, what about a person who was selling kerosene? In our case, we had also such situation, like people who were selling diesel, so what about those? So we try to build on existing skills and market, and existing value chains may need to be improved by some kind of intervention. So we consider those aspects. All the market players, when come together, can identify blockage in the system and make collaborative action. So these are the kind of success factors, I would say. And then when you talk about challenges, putting all the stakeholders in rural areas, our participatory market development approach requires all the stakeholders to be in the same place. So sometimes, since we are working in the very rural areas, it's sometimes challenging because we cannot predict how the system will behave by looking at the individual people or parts or just one subsector. So we need to understand the whole relationships, and if we do some interventions, what change in those relationships or interactions occur. So this is very crucial, but then again, sometimes it's very challenging to put them together. People also have found it time consuming as compared to other kind of approaches, because all the actors need to be convinced, and then they should recognize the potential of enhanced profits. That's sometimes difficult. Also, being very mindful of the changes that our interventions can bring, and then donors' flexibility in adapting to those is challenging. For example, like one of the examples would be, if there are many enterprises, number of enterprises increase, then the operators might need to have additional capacity to manage those. They need to have, they need to work maybe additional hours. Maybe the accountants need to work additional hours, and then sometimes these things are missed out. We talk about the turnover of staffs in these in these projects, but then we forget to, find out the root cause, like why it's happening. So this approach helps to identify those barriers. One of the other challenges was also about access to finance for appliances and equipment, and also sometimes capex finance, for running the businesses was also a challenge. Then again, talking about inclusivity, PT, we have done several initiatives. We have different kind of promotional activities that ensures women participation, but we see that it still needs everyone's attention, and there are more challenges there. And then in the end,
it's Molly here. Maybe you're just wrapping up, but it's just to let you know we need to move along. But would you like to finish up your last bullet here? And
yeah, it's just a last bullet. So we need to be very mindful that we don't it's not that we don't exclude the ongoing businesses there, but then we can be very mindful that we promote businesses that can really add value addition to the communities and the economic development. Yeah, I finished my presentation with this. Thank you all, and happy to receive any questions.
Thank you so much, Pooja. And I've been seeing some very interesting questions already coming through as you've been speaking. So I can assure you there are interesting questions here. Before we go to questions, one thing I'd like to do is do a couple of very, very quick polls here, actually about the content. So we've learned a bit about you, the audience, but we also want to learn a bit more about what you think about this particular topic. So I'm just going to launch this poll. So the question is, in your work, have you found it challenging to achieve development results from the productive uses of energy? Just select one of those responses there. Yes, no, sometimes, or perhaps not applicable. So thanks for voting. I'll give you guys just a second here to vote. I'm seeing those responses roll in, and I think we've had some really excellent presentations here. So we're also interested to hear from you in your experience. It's clearly not easy. So I think it's probably going to be a poll that says it's probably challenging. But at the same time, maybe some of you have had a smoother road to the productive uses of energy. So with that, I'm just going to share that with you all. Okay. All right, let me close that and share it with you. So we see 43% of you say yes, you found it challenging to achieve these development results. 5% say no, so that's very interesting. Perhaps if you responded no, feel free to send us in not necessarily a question, but a comment on why you didn't find that challenging. I think that would be very interesting. Some people say sometimes. We'd also be glad to hear from everybody on the yes and sometimes, and 19% not applicable. Okay, and another very, very quick poll here so that we can move on and get into some of your questions. Our last poll is, in your opinion, which factors pose the biggest challenges to achieving development results from the productive uses of energy? So what, in your view, have been the biggest challenges? Is it maybe the business model? Maybe it's the policy and regulatory environment that David was talking about. Maybe it's the lack of finance or capital that have come up in almost all the presentations, or Julia's point about the lack of training and capacity building that might exist. But also this other point about creating markets for the goods that are actually produced. Maybe that's something that you found especially challenging. So I think about half of you have responded. Anybody else who wants to respond? We will do that, and I'm going to share the poll with you now. Okay, so we will see what all of your results said. All right, let me share that with you. Okay, so pretty even divide there. 20% say business model, 11% say policy and regulatory environment, 26% say the lack of finance or capital, 17% the lack of training or capacity building, and 26% the creating markets for goods produced. Okay, thanks everybody for replying to those. What I'm going to do now is just go back to our holding slide here. If that's okay, Julia, I'm going to ask you to pop up your screen just so that we see everybody's names there. And if you all still do have questions, send those through. We're not going to be able to get to all of the questions that have come through. But what I would like to do actually, and I hope this is okay with the presenters because we have some quite interesting questions here. I may go directly to some of the audience questions if that's fine for you. I would like to ask first, Julia, are you there on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So what I would like to ask you is a question that has come in from the audience about whether there is quantifiable evidence of the value add of soft skills like vocational training, business support, etc., on A, social development outcomes, or B, developer bottom lines. Maybe you're particularly on the point of A, probably B is a little bit more David's area, but let me know what you feel comfortable responding to there. But is there quantifiable evidence of the value add of soft skills?
Well, as the word soft skills already implies, it's quite hard to quantify and to attribute this type of training into quantifiable evidence. But what we have seen is that projects that really provide full-on training and business support are usually more successful in establishing productive use that lasts longer for a longer time, or is more successful in the long run. To be, maybe this is something David can really better answer than me. Sure.
Okay, great. So on that second part, maybe we can pop over to David. Hi, David. Are you there? Hi, David. Sorry, I had you on mute.
Hello.
My fault.
That's all right. Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So the question was is there quantifiable evidence of the value add of soft skills like vocational training or business support for you, especially on the developer bottom lines?
That I'm aware of, no, because it's very hard to come by that sort of. It's already hard to come by any sort of data, to be honest. But especially that sort of data quantifying the use of soft skills. No. On the other hand, I think it's safe to say or to assume that if there is not a minimum of soft skills there, if there is no knowledge about whether it's now managing, maintaining at least the energy system, or let's say the basics of entrepreneurialism and so on, then it's going to be pretty challenging. So the soft skills are very important. Now, that actually brings then the question, to what degree do these skills need to be introduced to the community? Well, I think, of course, to some degree that needs to be introduced. On the other hand, we may also not forget that a lot of many of these communities have a number of skills, and they, at the end of the day, is their own community, so they know what they need. So what is most needed there is not that you necessarily go and tell them, this is how you manage a business. Of course, it can be part of something, but let's say how to capitalize on their knowledge. So again, and this is coming back to the point of the engagement with the local communities. Like, okay, you see an opportunity here to, I don't know, put the milk from your cows on the market a bit further away, but you need to cold storage it, otherwise it's not going to work, or transform it into other products. Okay, then you can speak about something concrete, because there's the idea, and then comes in the points that Pooja and also Julia were making, that you need then access to finance, you need to see what is the, develop the markets for these kind of products and so on. But so it's really both. It's a two-way street. That's what I'm trying to say. So on the one hand, you need to bring capacities that are absent, but on the other hand, you need to build on those that are already in the communities themselves to really make it work.
Exactly. Thanks, David. Thanks for that reminder not to reinvent the wheel necessarily each time. There are existing local capacities. So I'll move on now to Pooja Sharma. Hi, Pooja. Are you there?
Yes, Molly here.
So great. Hi, Pooja. I'd like to ask you a question that came in from the audience. I hope that's fine with you, a bit impromptu, but I think it's quite interesting. So this question says, you've given great suggestions for successful interventions and lessons learned, but what, if any, would you suggest that donors need to stop doing, or perhaps need to do less with respect to productive use interventions? What do you think you would reply to that question?
See, like, we have done lots of innovations, we have done lots of pilot projects, we have experience of from different pilot projects. So And then we have also findings from different research work. So, early, in the previous days, we used to say there's a gap between the research and the practitioners, but nowadays we do have information sharing mechanism, and then we have all those kind of results. So donors maybe should not should stop doing again pilot projects in the name of innovation. We already have a lot more examples and reflections from our groundwork. So if we put them together and then design a project compiling all those suggestions, then we can move forward. So let's stop doing all the smaller pilot projects. Let's let's look at the system in a very systematic way, from the system's perspective, look at the bigger picture, and then try to invest in something which can bring results at scale.
So you're proposing a bit more of a strategic approach rather than trying more pilots, yeah? Okay, thank you so much, Pooja. I think that's very interesting. Hopefully that's answering that audience member's question. So just returning back to Julia. Hi, Julia. Are you there on the line?
Yes, hi.
Hi. So I wanted to ask you another question. I know you had I think you already responded to the audience member, but I thought it was worth asking here because I think other people might be interested in it. So if the question is, if, as you mentioned in your presentation, productive uses doesn't necessarily increase incomes or only does it by a little bit, then what are the small immediate benefits that you mentioned?
Well, yeah, if productive use does only increase income a little bit, there are many other positive impacts that could come from productive use, such as increased availability of goods or a new availability of goods that maybe before could only be bought further away, but now are produced within the community. In terms of agriculture, you could also have food preservation. So if you harvest your fruits, then you can preserve them with the technology and have them at another time. So this could reduce food insecurity. So there are a lot of benefits that are not necessarily monetary, but improve the lives of the rural communities or the communities off the grid. So we shouldn't only look at the income as a result of productive uses.
Thanks, Julia. Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay, great. So we're back to David now. Hi, David. Are you there?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you one of my questions, I think, which is, it's about the facilitating finance for the productive uses of renewable energy. Is there one thing you think really needs to be done to better facilitate finance? And do small and medium companies need a specific approach?
Well, that's not a question that is so easily answered, but I think if one point could really make a difference is local financing, meaning, of course, we need to continue with all these international funds and the European funds and so on, but at some stage, it needs to be possible for a local entrepreneur to lend money at a local bank. Now, it's not really happening all that much because, well, I mean, I wouldn't do it if I have to pay 15% easily interest rate on some projects. If you walk into a shop, even in rural Zambia, in Madagascar, wherever you go, it's always very, very high interest rates. Plus, the banks don't trust you because they're not familiar enough with your technology, your business model, and that kind of thing. So there needs to be a skills training, but on the bank level, I think. Actually, one of our associate members is the French AFD, and they had a nice program in Eastern Africa, and I know of a few others. I think KfW has one too, whereby basically they provide financial and technical assistance to local banks to basically give them a partial risk guarantee as well as technical knowledge on this kind of projects, and then the banks should then lend to the entrepreneurs who build this sort of projects. You see, so this element of availability of local finance in local currency is something that is quite relevant, because you cannot expect especially let's say if you are in a remote community and somebody starts, I don't know, or powers with renewables their agricultural activity or their cold storage and so on. You cannot expect everyone to just sign up and to some tender by whichever institution. Yeah, that works for many, but not for everyone, and certainly not in the faraway remote communities. So both because it should at some stage become local finance a very important source of investment there, and also to really reach that last mile. And perhaps I may add to this, the microfinance institutions perhaps also have a role to play in this, especially when it comes to productive use, because this is something that they are already very well established. They already have the customer base for other types of financing. So this could be an interesting add-on for them as well. So it's the local finance through local banks and institutions, and then perhaps also a volume for microfinance.
Great, thank you, David. Food for thought there, especially on your point about local banks and microfinance institutions getting more involved. Moving next to Pooja to ask you a follow-up question. So David was just mentioning kind of the last mile, so I thought it's important to bring this in here as well, because we've talked a good bit about business and this type of thing, but we also need to think about reaching the poorest people, reaching the people in the last mile who really need it the most, and who could really benefit, whether that's from an income perspective or whether that's from all the other benefits that Julia has mentioned in her presentation. So how do you ensure that the poorest are benefiting from productive uses of energy? How do you ensure that it is a just use of that in the projects where you work? Hi, Pooja. Sorry, I had to. Okay, you can press unmute now, and it should be working fine. Sorry, that was again me who did that. So, Pooja, is that okay to tell us? How do you in your projects ensure that it's not only the people who start these projects, et cetera, who really benefit from them, the businesses? You want them to benefit because that means they're going to last. But how do you also ensure that everyone is getting a benefit from them?
Mm-hmm. So, we look at both kind of benefits and then take care of both kind of benefits, whether it's direct benefits and indirect benefits. Yeah. So not always that poorest people in the community, will establish an enterprises and ready to take the risks. As you know, people need to have business aspirations also, and the poorest people might not have, sometimes might not have those kind of aspirations and may not be able to take the risks. Then we try to see like where those people can fit in. Our approach allow them to get engaged maybe as an employee in the newly established businesses, and also they get benefits from the products and services that are locally available after the productive use interventions. So through our, we facilitate and convene various dialogues between the community members, and then see which beneficiary fits at which chain of the productive use. So yes, right. I mean, not necessarily that poorest people always can establish new enterprises, but then in terms of indirect benefits, they will be engaged as an employee, they can get more income, and then also, as I said, the product and service availability, we ensure those kind of things.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you. So just to return to Julia. Hi, Julia, are you there?
Hi.
I think since we're getting toward the end of our time, I'll close it with a question to you, if that's okay. So your research into these 30 projects is very revealing. And a lot of times we know that the productive uses of energy do not lead to development outcomes, or at least not as often as we would hope they would, and as much as perhaps donors and businesses would hope they would as well. If there's one main message that you would like to send to everyone, to the donors, to nonprofits, to businesses, about what needs to change based on your research, what would that message be?
Well, yeah, based on our research and our experience within Visions, we think it's really things that also Pooja and David already stressed, that you need to look at the community, what they want and what skills they have. So they need to be on board. And then you need to provide really full-on training and business support. In many cases, there might also be positive examples where you don't. But I think, yeah, we shouldn't expect productive use to develop just with excess of energy. Of course, there are many positive examples, and the more positive examples, the better. But yeah, so far research doesn't support it that just energy is enough for socioeconomic development.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. So I think with that, we can close the webinar. But before that, we'd like to thank everyone for attending, everyone who is listening. We'd like to invite you to please fill in the survey when the webinar ends, because with that, we can see what topics you would be interested in. Perhaps there are topics stemming from the productive uses of energy that you'd like to hear us cover in the future. So we'd like to have your ideas there, and we'd also just like to have your input as to how today went for you. And with that, I'd also like to thank all of the panelists for joining us here today. Thank you to Julia, David, and Pooja for taking the time to join. I know it's getting a little later in Nepal, so thank you for being here this evening, Pooja. And with that, we look forward to our next Visions webinar. We'll keep you informed about that and look forward to it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.